The Amazon van slowed beside the new package locker, paused for 3 seconds, then rolled past without stopping. Minutes later, FedEx did the same. UPS followed before noon. Karen stood in the street, phone pressed to her ear, demanding answers while Ethan watched from the edge of his driveway with a folder of property records under one arm. That morning, the HOA had called the locker community property. By afternoon, no carrier would touch it. Ethan had not moved a bolt. He had only sent 3 messages and 1 map. Before this story goes any further, tell us where you are watching from, and subscribe if you enjoy stories where patience, paperwork, and one careful question can change the balance of power. 3 weeks earlier, there was nothing remarkable about the strip of ground beside Ethan Cole's house. His property sat near the entrance of a planned community outside Raleigh, North Carolina, where 2 broad lanes narrowed into a quiet residential loop. The side yard faced that entrance at an angle. It was not large, but it was useful. Ethan kept 2 trash bins behind a short cedar screen, trimmed a row of dwarf hollies along the fence, and used the narrow concrete path there whenever he carried tools from the garage to the backyard. Delivery drivers noticed the location for a different reason. A van could pull to the curb, stop for less than a minute, and return to the main road without winding through 4 blocks of cul-de-sacs. During the holiday season, that convenience mattered. Amazon vans appeared before breakfast and after sunset. FedEx trucks idled near mailboxes. UPS drivers sometimes carried stacks of boxes 2 houses at a time. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the routine because nearly every porch received something every week. The HOA had been complaining about packages for months. Several residents reported boxes left at the wrong addresses. One woman posted security footage of a teenager taking a parcel from her porch, though nobody ever proved whether he lived nearby. Another family returned from vacation to find 5 wet boxes stacked beneath a gutter. The incidents were small, but they were frequent enough for Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, to frame them as a community problem. At the March board meeting, Karen introduced what she called a modern delivery solution. The association would install a secure package locker where drivers could leave shipments for residents to retrieve with a code. She presented photographs from other developments: clean metal cabinets, digital screens, landscape pads, tidy signs. The proposal sounded practical. Fewer trucks would circle the streets, fewer boxes would sit on porches, drivers would save time, residents would get a centralized pickup point. Ethan did not object. He had attended the meeting online while finishing dinner, listening more than speaking. When Karen mentioned 3 possible locations, one was near the clubhouse, one beside the pool parking lot, and one somewhere near the neighborhood entrance. She did not identify a parcel number or show a survey. The board voted to let a vendor evaluate the options and return with a recommendation. That should have been the end of it. A week later, Ethan noticed 2 fluorescent flags in the grass beside his side yard. They were close to the curb, one near the cedar screen, and another several feet toward the entrance sign. He assumed they marked utilities. Contractors had been replacing cable boxes nearby, and colored flags appeared often enough that he barely looked twice. Then a white pickup stopped there the following afternoon. 2 men wearing reflective vests stepped out, measured the distance from the curb, photographed the ground, and pointed toward Ethan's fence. Ethan watched through the kitchen window for a moment, then went outside. "Can I help you?" One worker turned and said they were checking the location for the HOA's package locker. He spoke casually, as if Ethan already knew. Ethan looked at the flags, then at the side of his house. "Here?" The worker nodded. "This is the preferred spot." There was an obvious reason. It was the easiest place in the entire development for a delivery van to reach. A driver could stop, unload 20 packages, and leave without entering the neighborhood. Ethan understood the logic immediately. What he did not understand was why anyone had chosen that convenience before asking who owned the ground. He asked whether the workers had a site drawing. They said the project manager had one, but their visit was only preliminary. Ethan thanked them and went back inside. He was not angry yet. HOA projects often changed after measurements, permits, and utility checks. Still, before dinner, he opened the folder from his purchase, found the plat, and set it on his desk. 5 days later, Ethan returned from work just after 4 in the afternoon and found a box truck parked partly across his driveway. Beside it, wrapped in cloudy plastic, was a steel locker unit taller than Ethan and nearly as long as his garage door was wide. In their place was a rectangular pad of concrete. 4 anchor bolts rose from the corners. Ethan stopped before pulling into the garage. One worker was drilling near the edge of the slab. Another was cutting open the plastic around the locker. A third man held a clipboard and watched the measurements. Ethan parked across the street and walked back. Who approved this location? The man with the clipboard introduced himself as Mark, the site supervisor for the installation company. He said the HOA had approved it and handed Ethan a printed work order. The top line listed the subdivision. Beneath it was a project number, a locker model, and an installation address described simply as Community Entrance, East Side. Ethan looked past the paper at the slab. "That is beside my house." Mark nodded. "This is the location they gave us. Did they give you a property authorization?" Mark hesitated. "We were given a site plan. Can I see it?" Mark turned the clipboard around. The drawing was simple. It showed the entrance road, Ethan's house, a fence line, the monument sign, and a shaded rectangle where the locker now stood. A heavy dashed line ran behind the rectangle and was labeled HOA Access Area. Ethan studied it without saying anything. Karen arrived less than 10 minutes later in a silver SUV. She stepped out already talking. "Ethan, I heard there was some confusion. I asked who authorized construction here." "There is no confusion about that," Karen said. "The board approved the community improvement last month." "That is not what I asked." Karen glanced toward the workers, then back at him. "This section has always been treated as association access. The locker serves everyone. It is not being built for one homeowner." Ethan looked down at the wet gray concrete. "Do you have an easement that covers this exact location?" Karen's expression changed, but only slightly. "The association has broad authority over common access areas." "Do you have the document?" "I am not going to debate governing documents with you in the street while contractors are working." Ethan did not raise his voice, "Then email it to me." Karen crossed her arms. "The board has already spent money on this project. We are not stopping an approved installation because you suddenly decided you dislike where it is." "I did not say I dislike the locker. You are interfering with installation." "No, I am documenting it." That was exactly what he did. He photographed the slab from the curb. He photographed each anchor bolt, the nearest fence post, the utility box, the edge of his driveway, the address marker on his house, and the project number on the work order. He asked Mark for the installation company's name and took a picture of the site plan after Mark confirmed he was permitted to do so. Then Ethan stepped away. He did not stand in front of the truck. He did not touch the tools. He did not threaten the crew. He did not call the police. That restraint irritated Karen more than an argument might have. She kept explaining that the locker would reduce theft, improve delivery efficiency, and raise the quality of life in the development. Ethan listened until she finished. Then he asked one more question. "Where did this boundary line come from?" Karen looked at the drawing. "The management company prepared the site packet." Ethan tapped the dashed line with one finger. "This line places the edge of the HOA access area almost 6 feet inside where I remember my recorded plat showing it." For the first time, Mark looked from Karen to Ethan instead of at the locker. Karen said the association's records were current. "Good. Then we can compare them." He walked into his house, opened the folder he had placed on his desk 5 days earlier, and unfolded the plat across the kitchen table. The line on that document was not where the HOA drawing said it was. Ethan did not begin by deciding Karen was lying. He began by assuming one of the drawings was wrong. The recorded plat from his closing packet showed his parcel as a narrow wedge near the neighborhood entrance. A drainage easement touched one rear corner. A utility easement ran parallel to the street. Neither appeared to create a broad association access strip beside the driveway where the locker had been installed. He found his deed next, then the title policy, then a survey prepared when the previous owner refinanced the property 8 years earlier. Each document described the same parcel in a different format, but the visible boundary was consistent. Ethan placed the site plan on top of the survey and aligned the road curves. The problem became obvious. The dashed line on the HOA drawing shifted the effective boundary toward his house. That shift was just large enough to make the new concrete pad appear safely outside his parcel. He went back outside after sunset with a flashlight. Near the base of the cedar screen, partly buried under mulch, he found a metal survey cap referenced on the older drawing. At the front corner, another marker sat closer to the curb. Ethan did not pretend that 2 pieces of metal made him a surveyor. He photographed them, measured only for his own comparison, and wrote down what he observed. The next morning, he sent the HOA a short email. He attached the recorded plat, the older survey, and a photograph of the site plan Mark had shown him. He highlighted the apparent conflict without accusing anyone of fraud or trespass. Then he asked for 3 things: the recorded easement covering the locker location, any written permission from the affected property owner, and the source document used to draw the access line on the installation plan. Karen answered before lunch. Her response was longer than his request. She explained that the association had maintained entrance areas for years. She said landscaping crews routinely worked near the monument sign. She cited a section of the governing documents, giving the HOA responsibility for common facilities. She reminded Ethan that all owners benefited from security and package management, but she did not attach an easement. She did not attach owner permission. She did not identify the source of the dashed line. Ethan replied with one sentence, "Please send the document that authorizes the association to use the specific ground occupied by the locker and concrete pad." That afternoon, the management company sent him a PDF labeled Entrance Maintenance Exhibit. At first glance, it looked promising. It included the subdivision entrance, shaded landscaping zones, irrigation lines, and the monument sign. But the package locker site was outside the darkest shaded area, and the exhibit contained a note Ethan had not seen on the site plan. Diagrammatic only. Property boundaries not established by this exhibit. If the management company knew the exhibit was not a boundary document, why had the installation plan drawn a firm access line through the same area? Ethan called the county records office and confirmed how to obtain the recorded subdivision plat online. He downloaded a clean copy directly from the public index. The parcel geometry matched the copy from his closing folder. He also searched the recorded documents associated with his lot for easements that might not appear clearly on the drawing. There were utility rights, there was drainage language, there were restrictive covenants. Nothing he found gave the HOA an obvious blanket right to install a permanent package facility on that side yard. Records could be incomplete. Amendments could exist under a different reference. A professional survey might eventually show something his documents did not. So he changed his language carefully. He stopped saying, "That is my land." Instead, he wrote, "There is a documented boundary conflict that needs to be resolved before continued use of this location." That sentence was harder to dismiss. Karen responded that the locker would become operational on Monday and that residents would receive pickup instructions over the weekend. Ethan looked at the message, then at the stack of records beside his computer. The issue was no longer whether a package locker was useful. The issue was that the HOA still could not show him the paper that gave it permission to put one there. Karen did not answer Ethan's last question with a document. She answered it with a meeting. On Saturday morning, the HOA sent residents a notice for a special online session about the new package system. The agenda described the locker as a completed safety improvement and listed resident concerns as the final item. Karen opened with photographs of stolen boxes. She cited the growth in online ordering, the number of delivery vehicles entering the development, and complaints about packages exposed to rain. She showed the polished promotional image from the locker vendor and thanked the board for moving quickly on behalf of the community. Then she addressed Ethan without using his name. One homeowner has questioned the location, even though this facility benefits more than 60 households. Several people nodded on camera. Ethan waited until public comments. "I agree that a package locker could be useful," he said. "My question is narrower. What recorded document gives the association permission to occupy the ground where this one was installed?" Karen smiled as if the answer had already been given. "As we explained, that area functions as part of the community entrance." "Where is that shown?" "In our governing records." "Which record?" The silence lasted only 2 seconds, but it changed the room. Karen referred again to the association's responsibility for common access and landscaping. Ethan asked whether she meant the declaration, the maintenance exhibit, or a recorded easement. Board member Daniel Price leaned toward his microphone. "Do we actually have an easement number?" Karen said the property manager was assembling the complete file. Ethan did not push harder. He did not need to. He thanked Daniel and asked that the file be circulated to the board and to him before the locker became operational. Karen shifted to the practical argument. Moving the unit would cost money. The clubhouse location would require electrical work. The pool lot was farther from the entrance. Delivery companies preferred quick access. Residents had asked for better package security. Delaying the project, she said, would penalize everyone over a technical dispute. Ethan listened until she finished. "I am not asking whether people like it," he said. "I am asking what gives you permission to put it there." The sentence stripped away every argument that did not answer the question. A resident named Melissa asked why the association had not obtained a signed authorization before concrete was poured. Another asked whether the HOA's insurance covered improvements installed outside common property. Karen said those questions were premature because the association believed the location was authorized. Believed. That word was new. By the end of the meeting, the board agreed to request additional records from the management company. Karen still refused to delay activation. Residents were told they would receive enrollment emails on Monday. Ethan made one final request in writing. Until the boundary issue was resolved, he asked the association not to represent the locker location to third parties as unquestionably authorized. He attached the same documents again and asked that his objection be included in the project file. The response came from the property manager Sunday evening. It did not include a boundary document. Instead, it included an email chain with the locker vendor. Ethan read it twice. 6 weeks earlier, the vendor had asked the HOA to confirm that the selected site was on association-controlled property, accessible to commercial carriers, and approved for installation. Karen had replied, "Confirmed. Proceed with entrance location." A second email contained a coordinate pin and instructions for the concrete contractor. Another message discussed onboarding the location with major delivery carriers after installation. That changed the scale of the problem. The HOA had not merely hired someone to put a cabinet near Ethan's yard. It had represented the site as an approved community delivery point to companies whose drivers would physically enter or stop beside the disputed area every day. Ethan opened the enrollment email residents had received. The locker had a location identifier. It was scheduled to begin accepting deliveries Monday morning. For the first time, Ethan stopped focusing only on the HOA. The locker could sit there because a contractor had installed it. But it could function only if delivery companies agreed to use it. And those companies had apparently been told something Ethan's property records did not support. That gave Ethan a new question and a completely different audience now. Ethan did not call a lawyer first. He did not call the police. He did not post a video accusing the HOA of stealing his land. He contacted the companies that would make the locker useful. With Amazon, the first conversation began through customer support and went nowhere. The representative assumed Ethan was reporting a missing package. Ethan clarified that he was reporting a delivery location listed for a residential community where the right to use the site was disputed. That produced a different ticket. He attached a photograph of the locker, the location identifier residents had received, the recorded plat, and the email in which he had asked the HOA to provide authorization. He did not demand that Amazon agree with him. He asked a simpler operational question. Would the company continue directing drivers to a centralized delivery point after receiving notice that the site's authorization was unresolved? The ticket was escalated. FedEx took the information through a local operations contact after Ethan called the station serving his zip code. UPS required another route through support, then a follow-up from a dispatch supervisor. In each case, Ethan used almost identical language. He was not asking anyone to determine ownership. He was not asking anyone to remove the locker. He was notifying them of a documented dispute and asking whether they wanted drivers using the site before it was resolved. By Sunday night, he had 3 reference numbers. Monday morning began quietly. At 8:17, an Amazon van entered the subdivision. Ethan saw it from his kitchen because the locker was visible through the side window. The driver slowed near the cabinet, looked toward a handheld device, then continued into the neighborhood. 10 minutes later, the van stopped in front of a house halfway down the block. The driver was delivering door to door. At 9:04, Ethan received an email tied to his support ticket. The message said the location information had been forwarded for review and that delivery instructions could be adjusted while the concern was evaluated. It was not a legal ruling. It was enough. Near noon, a FedEx truck approached the entrance. The driver stopped several yards before the locker, remained there briefly, then pulled away. A package for Ethan's next-door neighbor arrived at her front door 20 minutes later. Karen noticed. She walked from the monument sign to the locker, opened several empty compartments, and called someone. Ethan could not hear the conversation, but he could see the gestures. At 12:36, his phone rang. It was the HOA property manager. "Did you contact the carriers?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because the HOA gave them a delivery location that is under a documented authorization dispute. You are creating service problems for the neighborhood. I told them exactly what I told you." The manager asked whether Ethan had represented himself as speaking for the association. No. Had he told the companies the locker was illegal? No. Had he demanded that drivers stop deliveries? No. Ethan offered to forward every message he had sent. That ended the questions. An hour later, Karen emailed the board accusing Ethan of unilaterally interfering with an approved community service. Ethan replied to everyone with the 3 carrier messages attached. His note contained 4 sentences. He stated that he had identified himself only as the adjacent property owner. He had provided the conflicting property records. He had informed the carriers that the HOA had not yet produced the requested authorization. He had asked each company to decide its own operational response. Nobody had been ordered to do anything. At 2:11, a UPS truck appeared. This time Karen was already outside. The driver slowed, glanced at the locker, checked the device mounted near the dashboard, and kept moving. Karen stepped toward the curb as if she might wave the truck down, then stopped. The brown truck disappeared around the first bend. At 2:29, another message arrived, this one from a delivery operations account. It did not decide the property question. It simply confirmed that the locker would not be treated as a drop point while the location complaint remained open. Ethan saved the message beside the others. Paperwork had produced a result, and Karen was watching it happen in real time. Ethan watched from behind his screen door. One carrier changing instructions could have been coincidence. Two suggested caution. When the third passed the same new locker without opening a single compartment, the pattern became impossible to dismiss. By Tuesday, the package locker had become the most conspicuous unused object in the neighborhood. It was impossible to miss. The steel cabinet stood beside the entrance with its new touchscreen, clean paint, and small HOA logo fixed near the top. Residents had already created accounts. Several had received access codes, yet the compartment stayed empty. Amazon drivers passed it and continued to individual houses. FedEx did the same. UPS did the same. The carriers were not announcing a verdict on Ethan's property rights. Their position was more cautious, and for Karen, more damaging. Once they had been notified that the centralized location might not be authorized for use, they had little reason to make it an essential part of their route until someone resolved the question. That meant the HOA had a functioning locker system without functioning deliveries. Residents noticed immediately. A neighborhood message board filled with questions. Why had an Amazon package gone to a porch after the new locker email said centralized delivery was beginning? Why did one resident receive a pickup code for nothing? Was the locker broken? Had the vendor failed to activate it? Karen posted a short response stating that an individual homeowner dispute had temporarily disrupted carrier coordination. The wording did exactly what Ethan expected. It made him the problem. One resident replied that Ethan should stop holding the neighborhood hostage over a patch of grass. Another said the HOA should tow his vehicles if he was obstructing access, even though no vehicle was blocking anything. A third resident asked a better question. Is the locker actually on HOA property? Karen did not answer publicly. Instead, Ethan received a certified notice requesting that he cease interference with community operations. It cited no rule he had violated. It warned that continued obstruction could expose him to enforcement action. Ethan scanned it, saved the envelope, and added it to his folder. Then he sent the board the carrier correspondence again. The timeline now fit on one page. The HOA selected the site. The contractor installed the locker. Ethan produced conflicting boundary records. He asked for authorization. The HOA did not provide a recorded document resolving the conflict. He notified the carriers. The carriers independently changed their use of the location. Nothing in that sequence required Ethan to touch the locker. Nothing required him to stop a truck. Nothing required a confrontation. Karen called an emergency board discussion Tuesday evening. Ethan was invited for the first 20 minutes. She began by describing the financial impact. The locker vendor had completed installation. Activation fees had been paid. Residents were frustrated. Delivery efficiency had declined because carriers were returning to door-to-door service. Then she turned to Ethan. You contacted 3 national companies based on your personal interpretation of a boundary. I sent them the recorded plat and asked them to review the location. You knew they might suspend service. I knew they might make their own decision. You could have waited for the board. I asked the board before activation. Daniel, the board member who had asked about the easement number, interrupted. Karen, do we have the easement now? Karen said the management company had located additional documentation and would circulate it the next morning. That sounded like an ending. If the new document proved the HOA's right to use the ground, the carriers could reactivate the site. The locker would begin operating. Ethan would have his answer, even if he disliked it. He said exactly that. If the record covers the location, send it to me and the carriers. I am not asking them to ignore valid authorization. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Karen closed the meeting by saying the issue would be resolved within 24 hours. The next morning, she sent Ethan and the board a 6-page PDF. Her email contained one sentence. This confirms the association's permanent access rights at the entrance and should end further interference. Ethan opened the attachment expecting to see a recorded easement. He saw a legal description, a faded map, and signatures from almost 20 years earlier. For the first minute, it looked like Karen had finally found what he had requested. Then Ethan read the parcel number. The document covered the landscaped monument tracked across the entrance road, a narrow piece of common property where the HOA sign stood. Ethan checked the map. The rights described in it were real. They simply belonged to a different patch of ground than the one beneath the locker. It was not his. Ethan printed Karen's 6-page attachment and placed it beside the installation plan. The mismatch was not subtle once he knew where to look. Karen's document referred to Parcel C, the monument tract on the west side of the entrance. Ethan's home was Lot 114 on the east side. The legal description mentioned a stone marker and a curve running toward the clubhouse road. None of those features matched the ground occupied by the locker. He checked the recording stamp. The document was legitimate. That made Karen's claim more revealing, not less. She had not sent a fabricated record. She had sent a real record that appeared to concern a different piece of property and declared that it ended the dispute. Ethan replied to the board with screenshots from the county map. One showed Parcel C outlined around the monument sign. The other showed Lot 114 beside his driveway. He asked Karen to identify the language extending Parcel C's access rights across the road to the locker site. She did not answer. Daniel did. This appears to be the opposite side of the entrance. Am I reading that correctly? The property manager responded 20 minutes later and said the matter was being reviewed. Ethan then contacted the locker installation company. Mark, the supervisor he had met on installation day, transferred him to a project coordinator named Leah. Ethan explained the discrepancy and asked a narrow question. What property document did your company use to verify the installation coordinates? Leah looked up the project file. Her answer came quickly. We do not perform title verification for customer-selected locations. The customer certifies site control. Who was the customer? The homeowners association. What did they certify? Leah paused, then read from the intake record. The HOA had confirmed that it controlled the proposed installation area, had authority to approve permanent equipment there, and would be responsible for obtaining any required property permissions. Ethan asked for a copy if company policy allowed it. Leah said she could not release internal forms without authorization, but she could send a written summary of the site selection process and confirm the coordinates supplied to the crew. The coordinates matched the locker. That closed one loop. The contractor had not independently moved the project onto Ethan's side yard. It had gone where the HOA told it to go. But the answer opened another loop. Who inside the HOA had decided that the association controlled that ground? Ethan returned to the email chain already provided by the property manager. Karen had confirmed the entrance location, yet board approval alone did not explain where the boundary assumption began. He requested the minutes from the meetings where the locker project had been discussed. The first set contained broad approval for a package security project. The second was more interesting. 6 weeks before installation, the minutes recorded a site review. 3 potential locations were listed. The clubhouse was rejected because trenching power would cost more. The pool lot was rejected because drivers would need to enter farther into the community. The entrance location was described as existing HOA-controlled access adjacent to Lot 114. Ethan read that phrase 3 times. Adjacent to Lot 114. Not within Parcel C, not across from Lot 114, adjacent to it. The wording showed that whoever prepared the minutes knew the project sat beside a privately numbered lot. Yet there was still no reference to a recorded easement, owner consent, or survey. Then Ethan noticed the date. The board had selected the entrance location almost 3 weeks before the fluorescent flags appeared in his grass, before the workers measured the site, before Karen ever spoke to him about the exact placement, before he had any reason to know that the phrase community entrance meant the side of his house. He asked for the supporting packet from that meeting. The property manager sent a vendor estimate, an electrical note, a map screenshot, and a 1-page site recommendation. At the bottom of the recommendation, beneath the cost comparison, was a line that explained the decision. Entrance site preferred based on presumed HOA access and carrier convenience. Presumed, not verified. Ethan highlighted the word and forwarded the page to the board. The project had not reached his yard because someone discovered a hidden right in the property records. It had reached his yard because one assumption had been repeated often enough to become an instruction. And once that instruction moved from board minutes to vendor paperwork, every person after it treated the assumption as someone else's responsibility to verify before construction began there. The site recommendation changed the board's tone. Until then, Karen had framed the dispute as Ethan challenging a settled community right. The word presumed made that framing difficult to maintain. It suggested the right had never been settled at all. Daniel asked the management company for the complete project file. By Thursday afternoon, the board had documents from 4 different sources: HOA minutes, vendor estimates, installation invoices, and carrier onboarding emails. Ethan was copied on only some of them, but enough arrived to reconstruct the path. The package project had started with a budget of $18,000. The clubhouse option required additional electrical trenching and protective bollards, increasing the estimate by several thousand. The pool parking lot required no property work, but Karen argued that putting the locker there defeated the goal of reducing delivery traffic. The entrance location was cheapest and fastest. That economic advantage became the deciding factor. The property manager asked whether the association controlled the entrance strip. Karen responded that the HOA maintained it. A vendor representative then asked whether the location was approved. The property manager marked yes. The concrete contractor received coordinates. The installation crew received the site plan. The carrier onboarding team received the locker address. At each step, the previous step looked like verification. It was not. Daniel called Ethan that evening. "I thought management had checked the land record," he said. Ethan did not ask him to take sides. "Did the board ever vote on a document showing the right to use the site?" "Not that I remember." "Then that is the question." The next morning, the management company issued its own internal statement. It said it had relied on information provided by the association regarding property control and had not been retained to perform a title search. Later, the vendor sent a similar clarification. It had relied on customer certification. The contractor had relied on the vendor's approved site packet, and the carriers had relied on the location data submitted during onboarding. The chain was complete. Everyone had a reason for believing someone else had checked. Nobody could point to the person who actually had. Karen responded by arguing that long-term maintenance established the HOA's practical authority. Landscaping crews had mowed near the entrance for years. Irrigation lines crossed portions of the area. The association had replaced plants and repaired lighting nearby. Ethan asked whether any of those activities established the right to pour concrete and install a permanent commercial delivery structure. Karen accused him of splitting hairs, but the financial consequences were becoming impossible to ignore. The installation invoice showed the locker, slab, electrical setup, data connection, and labor had cost substantially more than the original cabinet price. Moving it would mean disconnecting equipment, breaking or abandoning the pad, preparing another site, transporting the cabinet, and reinstalling the system. Residents began asking who would pay. That pressure gave Karen a new reason not to concede. If she acknowledged that the site had been selected without verified authorization, the board would need to explain why community money had been committed before anyone resolved the boundary. The issue was no longer simply whether Ethan would tolerate the locker. It was whether the decision-making process had failed. At a closed board discussion, members considered what Karen later called a practical settlement. The HOA would not admit the site was unauthorized. Ethan would not demand immediate removal. Instead, they would offer him benefits in exchange for allowing the locker to remain. Daniel warned that asking Ethan to grant permission now might prove the association did not already possess the permission Karen had claimed. Karen disagreed. She said a new agreement could merely clarify existing access. The proposal reached Ethan Friday afternoon. The HOA offered to replace the landscaping beside his driveway, waive 1 year of assessments, and maintain the side strip at association expense if he signed a permanent access acknowledgement. Ethan read the document carefully. The first paragraph said the agreement was intended to avoid uncertainty. The second granted the HOA a continuing right to enter, maintain, repair, replace, and operate the package facility. The third bound future owners of Ethan's property. Ethan put the pages down. The board called it a compromise. To him, it answered the question they had spent 2 weeks avoiding. If the HOA already had the right Karen claimed, why did it suddenly need Ethan's signature to create one? He did not reject it by phone. He scanned the proposal, saved the envelope, and replied that he would not sign any document granting new access while the association continued representing that the same access already existed. Karen answered Ethan's refusal with a different kind of paperwork. On Monday morning, a violation notice appeared in his email. It accused him of obstructing a common facility and interfering with authorized community access. It directed him to stop contacting service providers in a manner that disrupted association operations. If the conduct continued, the notice warned, fines could be considered after a hearing. Ethan read it twice. Then he placed it beside the proposed access agreement. The contradiction was almost perfect. One document asked him to grant the HOA a permanent right to operate the locker. The other accused him of interfering with a right the HOA claimed it already possessed. He replied to the board, not just Karen. Please identify the existing recorded right referenced in the violation notice and explain why the proposed agreement separately asks me to grant a continuing access right. Daniel responded within an hour. He asked that enforcement be paused until the board reviewed the issue. Karen objected. She said Ethan was exploiting technical language to undermine a project approved for the entire community. Later that afternoon, she sent a neighborhood-wide update without naming him directly. A single adjacent owner, she wrote, continues to prevent normal use of the secure delivery facility despite repeated efforts by the association to resolve his concerns. The message changed the pressure immediately. 2 neighbors knocked on Ethan's door that evening. The first was frustrated. Her work schedule made porch deliveries difficult, and she had supported the locker because packages sometimes sat outside until midnight. She asked Ethan why he could not simply let the HOA use the strip. Ethan showed her the site plan and the recorded plat. Then he showed her the proposed agreement. She became quieter. So they want you to sign permission now? Yes. But they say they already have permission? That is what I am asking them to explain. The second neighbor was less sympathetic. He told Ethan everybody gave up something to live under an HOA and said one person should not be able to derail a community project. Ethan did not argue. If the locker were on your side yard and the board could not show its right to put it there, would you sign a permanent access agreement after construction? The man did not answer directly. Across the next 2 days, the neighborhood divided into camps. Some residents cared mainly about package convenience. Others cared about the property question. A few cared about the money. Several who had initially blamed Ethan began requesting copies of the project approval documents. Karen's attempt to make the dispute social had widened scrutiny instead. Still, the pressure worked in another way. Every time a package landed on a porch instead of in the locker, Ethan knew someone might blame him. Every delivery van moving through the neighborhood became a visible reminder. The steel cabinet remained beside his house, empty and expensive. Ethan could have posted every email publicly. He did not. He could have filmed Karen and turned the dispute into a neighborhood spectacle. He did not. He kept sending the same requests through formal channels. Document the authority, resolve the boundary, then decide what happens to the locker. Daniel eventually proposed an independent survey. Karen initially argued that the HOA's existing maps were sufficient. 2 other board members disagreed. With the violation notice now part of the dispute, they wanted a professional opinion that neither Karen nor Ethan controlled. The board voted to hire a licensed surveyor. Ethan agreed to provide access to the side yard for measurements. Karen asked him to suspend carrier communications while the survey was pending. Ethan replied that he had no ongoing campaign to suspend anything. The carrier tickets were already open, and the companies could make their own decisions. If the HOA produced documentation resolving the issue, he would forward it. That distinction mattered because Karen continued telling residents Ethan had blocked the locker. He had not. The companies had decided not to use a disputed site. 3 days later, the survey firm scheduled fieldwork for Wednesday morning. The notice listed the records it would review: the recorded subdivision plat, deeds affecting Lot 114, and neighboring common parcels, visible monuments, prior survey information, and any easements supplied by the HOA. For the first time since the concrete appeared, neither side would be drawing the line. Someone independent would. Karen had spent 2 weeks arguing that the dispute concerned only a few feet of ground. On Wednesday, those few feet were about to become measurable. And once a licensed surveyor placed that measurement on paper, neither a board email nor a community slogan could move the boundary afterward. Again. The survey crew arrived at 83 Wednesday morning in a white truck marked with the firm's name. 2 technicians began near the entrance monument. A third walked the edge of Ethan's property with a data collector and a metal detector. They did not ask Karen where she thought the line belonged. They did not ask Ethan where he wanted it to be. Ethan had already emailed his deed, closing survey, and recorded plat. The HOA supplied the entrance maintenance exhibit, the older easement Karen had sent, and its installation site plan. The surveyor also retrieved recorded documents independently. For nearly an hour, nothing dramatic happened. The crew searched, measured, checked monuments, compared bearings, moved equipment. That slow work was exactly why Ethan had wanted an independent review. The argument had spent weeks growing through emails, assumptions, and accusations. Now every claim had to survive physical measurement. Karen arrived around 9. She stayed near the curb and spoke with the crew chief, who explained that field observations would not be treated as a final opinion. Karen asked whether the HOA could continue using the locker while the work was underway. The crew chief said that was not a surveying question. Ethan heard the answer from his driveway and said nothing. Shortly before 10, one technician placed a temporary stake near the edge of the concrete pad, then another. The line between them did not follow the dashed boundary on the HOA site plan. It cut through the area the HOA had labeled as association's access. The concrete pad extended across it. Karen walked closer. What does that indicate? The crew chief repeated that the field marks were preliminary and the final survey would govern. But he confirmed that the monuments being recovered were consistent with the recorded geometry they were using. Karen pointed toward the entrance. The association has maintained this strip for years. That may be relevant to your attorney, the surveyor said. Our assignment is to locate the boundary and referenced easements. By noon, the crew left. The temporary marks stayed. For 2 days, Karen told residents no conclusion should be drawn from stakes in the grass. Ethan agreed. He did not photograph himself standing beside them. He did not post victory messages. He waited for the signed work product. Friday afternoon, the PDF arrived. The survey showed Lot 114, the adjacent common tract, the roadway, the recorded utility easement, and the drainage area. It also showed the package locker pad. A portion of the permanent installation crossed onto Lot 114. The survey did not declare the HOA guilty of anything. It did not calculate damages. It did not tell the board what remedy to choose. It answered the spatial question. The locker was not entirely within the common property shown on the recorded documents reviewed by the surveyor. Ethan forwarded the PDF to the HOA and the 3 carrier contacts with one sentence. Independent survey attached for your review regarding the existing location dispute. One carrier confirmed the delivery point hold would remain while site authorization was unresolved. Another said centralized delivery would not resume without updated location approval. The third did not discuss legal rights at all. It simply kept the locker inactive in its local instructions. Karen focused on the size of the encroachment. She called it minor. She said the cabinet itself appeared closer to the association side than the outer pad edge. She argued that relocation would be disproportionate to a narrow boundary issue that caused Ethan no practical harm. Ethan did not debate adjectives. Does the HOA have my permission for the portion shown on Lot 114? Karen said the board needed legal review. That was the first time she had answered the question without claiming the permission already existed. The vendor also reacted. Leah emailed the property manager and board requesting written direction before any technician serviced, moved, or reconfigured the locker. Because the approved site certification was now disputed by a professional survey, the vendor wanted responsibility for the next step clearly documented. The contractor took the same position regarding the concrete. Nobody wanted to act on another assumption. By late Friday, Karen was trapped between 4 separate systems. The homeowner wanted verified authority. The carriers wanted a resolved delivery site. The vendor wanted written instructions. The board wanted to know how an unverified location had been approved. Daniel requested an emergency meeting for Monday evening. The agenda had only 3 substantive items: review the survey, determine responsibility for the existing site, and authorize a remedy. For weeks, Karen had described the conflict as Ethan's personal objection. Now the boundary was a signed drawing attached to the board packet. And Monday's meeting would decide whether the locker stayed, moved, or came out. Monday's emergency meeting began at 6:30 with every board member present, the property manager on video, and representatives from the locker vendor and installation company available by phone. Ethan brought one folder. Karen brought a presentation. She started with the purpose of the project: package security, reduced delivery traffic, resident convenience. She showed the original approval vote and reminded the board that the locker had been supported by a majority of owners who responded to the HOA survey. Daniel stopped her before the 4th slide. We know why we bought it. We need to know why we put it there. The room became quiet. Ethan was invited to summarize his position. He did not give a speech. He placed the chronology on the table. First, the board approved a general package project. Second, the entrance site was selected based on presumed HOA access. Third, the vendor received certification that the association controlled the site. Fourth, construction occurred before Ethan received any document establishing that control. Fifth, Ethan produced records showing a conflict and requested authorization. Sixth, the HOA failed to provide a record covering the location. Seventh, carriers were notified and independently stopped using the centralized point. Finally, the license survey confirmed that part of the installation crossed onto Lot 114. Ethan closed the folder. That is the sequence. I want the boundary respected and the location resolved. Karen responded that the survey did not prove intentional wrongdoing. Ethan agreed. She said the encroachment was small. Ethan did not dispute the measurement. She said moving the locker would cost the association money. Ethan agreed with that too. Every time Karen widened the argument, Ethan narrowed it back to the same fact. The vendor representative then confirmed that the HOA had certified site control during onboarding. The installer confirmed its crew followed the coordinates in the approved packet. The property manager confirmed it had relied on information from the board rather than conducting a title review. Daniel asked Karen directly, "What document did you rely on when you confirmed we controlled the site?" Karen referred to the association's maintenance history and entrance maps. "Was there a recorded property document?" Karen paused. "Not one that specifically describes the locker footprint." That sentence ended the argument that had dominated the previous 2 weeks. The board moved to remedies. Leaving the locker in place would require negotiating an access agreement with Ethan, but Ethan had already declined to grant a permanent right. Modifying only the concrete would not solve the location problem if service and maintenance still required access across his parcel. The clubhouse remained expensive. The pool parking lot remained inconvenient. But both were on property the association could clearly document. The vendor recommended a small common parcel near the entrance monument, on the opposite side of the road from Ethan, if utility clearance permitted. It was less convenient than the disputed site, but still accessible to carriers. Daniel made a motion to suspend enforcement against Ethan, withdraw the violation notice, authorize relocation planning, and prohibit further work at the existing site, except what was necessary to remove the equipment and restore the affected area. 3 members voted yes. Karen voted no. The motion passed. There was no applause. Ethan did not smile at her. He asked when the removal schedule would be confirmed. The contractor said it could inspect the pad the next morning and coordinate with the vendor. The carrier representatives were not present, but the board agreed the new location would be resubmitted for approval before residents were told centralized delivery had resumed. Karen asked that the minutes state she had acted in the community's interest. Daniel said the minutes could reflect everyone's statements. Then he added something else. Intent does not replace verification. The meeting ended at 8:12. At 7:40 the next morning, Ethan heard a truck outside. The same installation company that had arrived weeks earlier was back beside his driveway. This time the crew was not carrying a new locker toward the concrete. Mark recognized Ethan from installation day. He gave a small nod, checked the removal order, and said nothing about who had been right. The paperwork now told the crew exactly what to do. They were loosening the anchor bolts. The locker did not disappear in one dramatic moment. First, the vendor technician shut down the screen and disconnected the data hardware. Then the installation crew removed the fasteners, lifted the steel cabinet onto a pallet, and secured it inside a truck. The concrete pad remained for another week, while the HOA and contractor decided how much of it could be removed without damaging nearby utilities. Ethan watched from his kitchen. He never stepped outside to celebrate. 2 weeks later, the locker reappeared on the opposite side of the entrance, set back from the monument sign on a parcel the HOA's survey clearly identified as common property. The new pad was slightly smaller. Protective posts stood at each corner. The association had obtained the utility clearance and documented the site before the cabinet returned. Only then did the carrier onboarding process start again. Amazon tested the new location information. FedEx confirmed local routing. UPS updated its delivery instructions. For several days, drivers still went door to door. Then one afternoon, Ethan saw an Amazon van stop at the relocated cabinet. The driver opened a compartment, placed a package inside, closed the door, and returned to the van. This time, nobody objected. The locker had never been the real enemy. The location had been. The financial cleanup lasted longer. The HOA had to pay for removal work, restoration beside Ethan's driveway, preparation of the new site, and portions of the installation that could not simply be reused. At the next regular meeting, residents asked why those costs had not been avoided before the first slab was poured. The board's answer was less dramatic than some people wanted. The project had moved through too many assumptions and too little verification. No hidden conspiracy was uncovered. No secret company had stolen the neighborhood. No federal agents arrived. A board president believed maintenance history meant control. A manager relied on the board. A vendor relied on certification. A contractor relied on coordinates. Convenience moved faster than documentation. The board changed its project policy. Any future permanent improvement near a parcel boundary would require a recorded property reference, survey confirmation when needed, and written documentation of site authority before a vendor received approval to build. No board member could satisfy that requirement by simply writing that access was presumed. The violation notice against Ethan was formally withdrawn. His account showed no fine. The proposed permanent access agreement was marked rejected and removed from active consideration. Karen remained on the board through the end of the quarter but no longer managed the locker project. At the next election, another resident became president. There was no public humiliation ceremony, no dramatic removal, and no final confrontation in the street. The consequence was quieter. Her decisions were now documented the same way Ethan had insisted everything else should be. The side yard took longer to look normal. Workers cut away the unnecessary concrete, filled the disturbed ground, repaired the edge of the walkway, and replaced 2 damaged shrubs. For a few weeks, the new grass was brighter than the rest of the lawn. By summer, even that difference faded. Delivery vans still slowed near the entrance. They simply stopped on the other side. Sometimes Ethan saw neighbors walking to the locker with phones in hand, collecting packages after work. The system Karen had wanted eventually did what it was supposed to do. It reduced some porch deliveries. It gave drivers a quick centralized stop. Residents who preferred it used it without thinking about the weeks when the first locker had stood empty beside Ethan's driveway. That suited him. He had never wanted the neighborhood to lose the service. He had wanted one question answered before someone else's convenience became a permanent claim on his property. The answer did not come from shouting louder than the HOA. It came from a recorded plat, a site plan, a vendor certification, 3 carrier tickets, board minutes, an independent survey, and a refusal to let one assumption become true merely because enough people had repeated it. Months later, the original dispute was reduced to a thick folder in Ethan's desk. Most days he had no reason to open it. The cedar screen stood where it always had. The trash bins stayed behind it. The narrow path beside his house was once again only a path. That difference was small on a map, but enormous in principle. The package locker had always been about convenience. The boundary was about permission, and only one of those could be assumed.